Now, also with the firewall is an integration with IP security, otherwise known as IPsec. That is a collection or suite of protocols that provides network security for data packets and can do so on both internal and external networks. Number of different technologies that are at use. This has actually been available in the Windows operating system for many years, Windows 2000, I believe. It's not something that's heavily used, but Microsoft really focuses on this. It's very likely to see questions on it on the exam, albeit that other than test environments, I've never actually seen it implemented internally. There's tons of IPsec VPNs, but that's not what we're talking about. You don't need connection security rules for an IPsec VPN. You just have a VPN client, or it's a site-to-site VPN, and only encrypted between those 2 points. This is in transport mode, and so it features data protection implemented at the network layer. The reason that that's key is because it means that applications don't need to support IPsec. You know, if you've got a web application and you want to use security, it's got to support SSL. But if you have a web application and you use IPsec, the web application has no idea that IPsec is even being used. You know, so that is a significant benefit. It provides integrity by digitally signing data, so data packets can't be altered in transit. It provides confidentiality through encryption. Non-repudiation speaks to the digital signatures as well. Essentially, it's saying that, you know, somebody can't disown having sent a message or a packet if it was signed by their computer. And then protection against replay attacks through timing sequences and whatnot. IPsec works by mutually authenticating computers and negotiating security prior to communication. And so it's one of those things where if you and I can't negotiate, we can't come to what's called a security association and establish that, then we will not communicate. That is the default for IPsec. IPsec can provide a number of different usage scenarios. It can be used for packet filtering. Basically, you could enable IPsec for certain types of traffic, not enable it for other types of traffic, and then turn on just a general disallow. So if it doesn't match an IPsec rule and you can't have a security association, then you don't communicate. Securing host-to-host traffic, securing traffic to servers, those are typically what it's used for. Let's say you got a database application and a line of business app that interfaces with it, and the database application doesn't support any level of encryption. But you'd like to enable encryption for this traffic between client and server, so you set up rules on both sides, and IPsec being sort of, it doesn't matter if the application supports it or not because it's done at the network layer, so it works perfectly for that. It is also used with VPNs, site-to-site tunneling, and you can use it to create logical networks. This was a function of the old network access protection that was used in Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2012. IPsec is 3 different protocols, although there are some other protocols in there, but these are the 3 main ones. Encapsulating security payload, which does encryption and digital signing. Authenticating headers, which does just the digital signing. You usually use one or the other of those. I believe we mentioned that when we were talking about VPNs. And then Internet Key Exchange, which actually handles the security associations and the establishment of encryption keys. There are several different tools that you can use to configure IPsec. You are likely only to use the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security and the connection security rules that are provided there. There are several different types of security rules. Isolation rules, isolate based on domain membership or health status if you're using NAP, Network Access Protection. Server to server is probably the most common because it's that point-to-point or one-to-many type of rule. Authentication exception or exemption, will exempt certain hosts if they're not capable of using IPsec or you just don't want them to for some other reason. Tunnel is if you're doing it in a VPN, and then custom, you basically just have all the options. You could use IP security policy. It does still exist, but that's really just for backward compatibility, say with Windows XP. NetSH is a command line interface, as is PowerShell. Both of those can be used as well to create and manage connection security rules. When you create a connection security rule, you have 3 different authentication options. You can request security for both inbound and outbound. You can require security for inbound and request for outbound, or you can require for both. If you choose require, then that means if your system cannot come to an agreement, to terms with the other system, then you won't connect. But most of the time, if we're taking the time to implement IPsec, it's because we want that additional level of security. So beyond testing phases, we generally would require, especially for inbound connections. So but that's an option that we get in the Connection Security Rule Wizard. You also have different authentication methods you can use within a domain, the Kerberos v5 protocol. That's just version 5. That's the default authentication protocol in an Active Directory network. It is very secure. It's very easy to use in a domain. If you want the most secure, you'll use certificates, but that requires the establishment of a certificate authority and a public key infrastructure, and it just becomes more complicated. The least secure would be the pre-shared key. Pre-shared key is basically just a password set on both devices, but it's listed right there in the Connection Security Rule. So in a Windows environment, we're typically never going to use that option. Not only can you use the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security to create connection security rules, but you can also use it to monitor IPsec, the current rules that are in place, the settings that they contain to make sure that they're compatible. Also, current security associations. Main mode and quick mode. Main mode shows level 1 IPsec SAs. It shows the initial communication, the establishment of keys. And then quick mode, I know that sounds backwards, but quick mode is actually showing data transfer. So if you're trying to monitor if a system is using IPsec and what associations it currently has, you can use that. There is, as I said, the IPsec policy snap-in, NetSH, both of those can also be used for monitoring purposes. Moving on to malware, this is another type of protection that we are going to need to protect us from network security threats. Of course, malware comes in all shapes and sizes, lots of different types, and we need to understand the differences, at least briefly, about them. A virus is the most common word that gets used, but it's a word that gets used and sometimes inappropriately. A true virus is malicious code that is attached to another file, an executable, a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet with macros in it. That's a virus is associated with those. Sometimes it damages that file, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes when you run the file looks legit, but it runs executable code against the system that destroys data, corrupts files, formats partitions, all kinds of nasty stuff. A worm is a bit different. It is malicious code, but it's a standalone form of malicious code. And often a worm is dangerous because of its self-replication. So the worm just tries to use network connections, an email address list, or address books, I should say, to replicate itself, copy itself to as many other systems as possible. A Trojan horse gets its name from the old story, the Horse of Troy. It is a program, malicious code hiding inside another program. The external carrier program probably serves some function, probably works just fine, but in the background, an additional program has been added. And this is not the same as spyware, although it may seem similar. Trojan horses are typically for the purposes of identity theft or the purposes of remote control. Macros are built-in executable code inside Word documents and spreadsheets. If they contain malicious code, then when the macro is initiated, it drops the payload. Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge add-ons can potentially contain malicious code. Then you do have spyware and adware. Spyware is for the purposes of spying. It is often used for identity theft. Adware is the purposes of advertising. So that's usually just causing pop-ups and things. And then email attachments can also contain various types of malicious code. Your best protection is to have anti-malware programs installed and kept up to date. It's very important to have both of those be the case. The anti-malware program in Windows 10 is the same anti-malware program that we've had for a while. In Windows 7 with Microsoft Security Essentials, you got both antivirus and anti-spyware protection. And then with Windows 8 and 8.1, that was just added into Windows Defender. Windows Defender is installed and enabled by default. It's automatically protecting the system using scheduled scans. and it allows you to configure the appropriate response based on the severity level of whatever the threat is, or whatever the threat is categorized as. It does use Windows Update for both virus and spyware definitions, and it's critical that you keep up to date. I mean, new viruses and spyware are released all the time. If you've got an anti-malware program that's not being updated, then you're not really protected for very long, and it's almost good for nothing at that point. So, it's really important, and so it's very nice that these updates are through Windows Updates, because Windows Updates are already turned on by default. You're already getting those downloaded and installed. You can do scheduled scans. Scheduled scans are set up by default. You can also go in and do manual scans, and when you do that, you have different options. A quick scan is going to scan the most likely places for malware to infect. A full scan scans your whole system, just takes longer. And then a custom scan can scan individual areas of the hard drives. You can specify a particular folder or even a particular file. Let's take a look at Windows Defender here. The Windows Defender desktop application opens up, protected by default. Real-time protection and virus and spyware definitions. Looks like we might want to update those. They were created, they were updated in July, it says, so we would want to go through an update. Yeah, that's too long. We want to be updating, and I'm not even sure where those values came from, being that I installed the operating system a couple of days ago. So anyway, it's updating. You want to always make sure that that's the case. If you want to do a manual scan, quick, full, custom. If you choose custom, then you're going to be choosing the particular drives or folders. You'll see the history. You can see the history of quarantined items, allowed items, detected items, those kinds of things. And then if there's something in here, it'll show you the alert level, and then you can remove it. You can also go into settings. That's going to take me over to the settings app. That's where this is gone now. You can turn off real-time protection if you want. Cloud-based protection is sending Microsoft info about the problems so that they can act on them. That's a good thing to keep on. This is a good thing to keep on. You can add exclusions if you want. You can exclude certain file types. You can exclude certain files, folders, processes. If you know they're trusted, you don't want them scanned, that's fine, okay? And then this just gives me version information. That's actually a lot less than what we used to have. But then again, Windows Defender is kind of a standalone thing. It doesn't require a whole lot of configuration in most cases. Okay, so it just kind of is there. Is it going to protect you against absolutely every threat? No. Honestly, I've had several systems who have become infected while running Windows Defender. It is certainly better than nothing. That plus safe browsing habits, and you should be just fine. But if you find something where Windows Defender doesn't seem to pick it up, well, then there are all manner of third-party anti-malware solutions, anti-spyware solutions out there that you can use on a case-by-case basis. If you get a real infected system, try to find one of the free rescue disks out there. You can boot up to the disk and scan the system. Practically speaking, that's going to be very helpful in real-world environments.